This video was sponsored by Black Desert Online. How's it going, everybody? Too spooky here. In this video today, we're going to be explaining the sacred treasures from the 7 deadly sins. This topic has been one I've been wanting to cover for a while now. However, I told myself I was going to wait until all 7 were revealed within the series before tackling it. Now that the 7th has finally made its debut, it's about time we get started. Before we get into what each one is and what they can do, I figured it would be best to start with some background information on what exactly the sacred treasures are. We were first introduced to the sacred treasures upon the introduction of King, with his sacred treasure, Spirit Spear Chastiful. Gila mentioned that it was crafted from the sacred tree that's found within the fairy realm, therefore giving it strength far above any normal weapon, that amplifies King's power in the process. Out of all 7 sacred treasures, Chastiful is the only one that's properties are ever mentioned, in terms of what it was created from, and I highly doubt the other 6 treasures were also created from the sacred tree because that wouldn't really make sense, leaving their creative properties a mystery. Fast forwarding a little bit, we learn from King that the sacred treasures were crafted specifically for each member of the 7 deadly sins, and given to them by King Leones. Each sacred treasure has its own set of unique abilities for the member of the sins that it was made for, and we also learn that the special abilities of these sacred treasures can only be used by the specific sin that they were created for. Otherwise, they would just appear like a normal weapon, although a bit more durable. In general though, the purpose of the sacred treasures is to bring out the sins' full power, or their full potential. Because although each member of the sins have a great deal of power within them, it's not always possible to bring the majority of that power to the surface. In fact, each member of the sins are only able to tap into a small fraction of their full power by themselves. So the sacred treasures essentially allow their user to tap into their power reserves and bring out the full extent of power they have within themselves that they couldn't normally use. On that note, the sacred treasures can generally bring out their full power, or another unique ability, with the phrase, Sacred Treasure Release. Back in the day, before the sins' supposed betrayal, these sacred treasures were said to be the main reason that the sins rose to be the most powerful holy knights in the land. However, we would later learn this wasn't entirely the case, but the sacred treasures, no doubt, helped these 7 become much more powerful than they originally could be. Aside from that, we don't know anything else regarding the background of these weapons. So with that out of the way, let's take a look at the 7 sacred treasures and what they can do. But first, let's take a minute to talk about today's sponsor, Black Desert Online. Black Desert Online is a fantasy MMORPG that recently got remastered earlier last year. When you start up the game, let's just say you have a lot of options. As first off, you need to decide on a class, with there being 18 to choose from, including a brand new class called the Shy. After that, you get to create your character's appearance, and let me just say this is probably the most expansive character creation I've ever seen. And taking a look at what other people have done, you can see just how far you can take this creation. It's honestly a lot of fun by itself. But as far as the actual gameplay goes, being an MMORPG, you obviously get plenty of content involving many other players, including extensive PvP action and also PvE with real-time action-based combat, which also includes its own in-depth skilling, crafting, and economy systems, which also includes regular new updates both on a larger scale and for quality of life. All in all, I had a ton of fun playing it, and now you can too. Be sure to follow the link in the description to get a 7-day free trial today, and a special thanks to them for making this video possible. Now without further ado, let's take a look at the sacred treasures. And at this point, I'm also going to issue a spoiler warning, as we will be talking about aspects from the later parts of the manga. Also, my pronunciation really sucks. Since we talked about it a little bit earlier, let's start off with King's sacred treasure, Spirit Spear Chastiful. Like we mentioned before, Chastiful was created directly from the sacred tree that resides within the fairy realm, and for that reason, it is able to draw power directly from the sacred tree. An additional ability of Chastiful in particular would be regeneration, as if Chastiful were to be broken into pieces, it would eventually regenerate back into its full form. As a sacred treasure, it amplifies King's ability Disaster, which in turn gives King the ability to transform Chastiful into 9 different forms at will, each form with its own unique properties. These 9 forms are as follows. Form 1 is the Spirit Spear itself, which is the form King utilizes the most. From what we've seen, King mostly uses this in conjunction with a levitation ability to attack his opponents from afar, being able to chase them down with the spear without having to move an inch himself. With added speed, this weapon can essentially feel like it's flying toward its enemy from every direction at once. Form 2 is called Guardian, which forms into a very large stuffed bear, which is essentially made up by shapeshifting the moss that forms from the sacred tree. This form is mainly used for defensive purposes, as its soft exterior is able to absorb attacks. The stuffed bear aspect allows it to directly parry any attacks from its opponent at the same time, having 4 different arms to do so. Additionally, it's also highly resistant against fire abilities, but extremely weak to cold or freezing abilities. Form 3 is called Fossilization, which transforms into a 2-pronged spear that contains the additional ability of turning whomever it pierces into stone, rendering them into nothing but a mere statue, even if the individual underneath is still alive after getting stabbed by the spear in the first place. Form 4 is called Sunflower, which essentially transforms into a gigantic sunflower that can also shoot energy beams at its opponents. Form 5 is called Increase, which transforms into a vast amount of kunai knives that King can control individually, similar to Spirit Spear, allowing him to attack his enemies in many different directions, attack multiple enemies at once, or just drop them all at once for a guaranteed hit. Form 6 is called Yugdra Cloth, which is where Chastiful wraps itself around King's body, transforming into a suit of armor with large blades attached to his forearms. Form 7 is called Luminosity, which transforms into a glowing sphere that King can use to light dark environments. Form 8 is called Pollen Garden, which transforms into a gigantic barrier that surrounds an individual or group. This barrier is able to block against essentially any attack, no matter how powerful, with the additional ability of healing whomever is within the barrier. And the final form isn't exactly numbered, but Chastiful transforms into a pillow that King can carry around or use as a shield. In addition to all of that, once King says Sacred Treasure Release, he is granted his maximum capacity of magic from the Sacred Tree, in return making his Sacred Treasure transform into True Spirit Spear Chastiful, which takes on a much larger size and greatly enhances King's power level. True Spirit Spear also greatly enhances each of Chastiful's many forms. The only issue being that King receives great drawbacks using this much power, namely being completely exhausted and even receiving physical damage if he pushes it too far. If all that wasn't enough, once King developed his wings, he gained access to new True Spirit Spear Chastiful, which is essentially True Spirit Spear Chastiful, but even stronger, and apparently newer. This makes all of Chastiful's forms even more powerful than before, but in addition to that, King no longer experiences any drawbacks using this massive amount of power. Additionally, King can now control Chastiful even if he's miles away from it. We'll talk more about King's new abilities as a developed Fairy King in a later video, but needless to say, he's able to channel his newfound power through his Sacred Treasure to make it even stronger than it was previously. And with this newfound power, he no longer has to say Sacred Treasure Release to bring out Chastiful's true form. Next up, we have Meliodas' Sacred Treasure, Demon Sword Lost Vein, which appears like a small curved sword with 5 holes moving up the blade. The hilt has the dragon sin symbol on the side, and the back of the sword appears to be a dark green color. But apparently while Meliodas is in his assault form, the green turns to red. It should be noted that Meliodas sold Lost Vein in the past for funds to open up the Boar Hat, and therefore went a good chunk of the series without it. However, apparently Merlin bought it from a pawn shop in Camelot and held onto it ever since, giving it back to Meliodas when the situation called for it. Unlike King's Sacred Treasure, Lost Vein is essentially just an above-average sword until Meliodas says Sacred Treasure Release, which essentially allows him to pull out the Shadow Clone Jutsu. But in all seriousness, this ability is called Jitsuzo Bunshin, which allows Meliodas to create up to 4 clones of himself from what we've seen. Not counting the non-canon movie, of course. These clones are essentially just like a normal Meliodas. However, they are significantly weaker. When it comes to creating these clones, Meliodas essentially has to split his total power level into even amounts among his clones. So if he starts out with a power level of 3,370, making one clone results in a power level of 1685, therefore meaning if Meliodas were to make all 4 clones, they would all have a power level of 420. Because their power level is much lower, this makes them much easier to kill. However, a big bonus to using this clone technique is that each Meliodas clone is still able to use full counter to its full extent, meaning they could all return an enemy's attack at once for
massive damage.
However, when it comes to physical fighting, these clones are at a big disadvantage against outrageously strong opponents. Lost Fane doesn't contain any other abilities from what we've seen. Next up, we have Diane's Sacred Treasure, Warhammer Gideon. Appearance-wise, it's basically a gigantic hammer, as it was made for a giant, having a very long handle and a giant spike on the opposite side of the hammer itself. It's apparently made out of some material that is stronger than steel, but we don't know what that material is, and it's said to weigh approximately 2,200 pounds. Diane apparently lost Gideon at some point in the past, but luckily it turned up as one of the rewards for winning the Vasil Fight Festival, so she was able to reacquire it. Like the other sacred treasures, Gideon is able to push Diane's abilities to their full potential, in her case being creation, which allows her to manipulate the earth itself. Gideon doesn't grant Diane any unique earth manipulating abilities, but it does significantly increase her ability to manipulate the earth in general. Gideon also has an additional ability called Lightning Rod, which allows her to absorb any magical attack and direct it into the earth itself, therefore canceling it out. However, Diane doesn't really like using that technique because upon entering the earth, the attack she absorbed will instead harm the creatures underneath, along with the earth itself. Unlike some of the other sins, Diane has yet to be seen saying Sacred Treasure Release, so it's unknown if she has some latent special abilities or techniques that she has yet to use with Gideon. Next up, we have Gothir's Sacred Treasure, Twin Bow Herit. Appearance-wise, Herit is basically 2 separate bows that are made of this purple energy. So I'm not exactly sure how the King of Leones managed to find someone to create these, but being that they are made of energy, Gothir can make them appear or disappear whenever he wants. Gothir can use Herit to bring out the full potential of his magical ability, Invasion, which allows them to manipulate the memories and souls of others. In this particular case, Herit essentially allows Gothir to extend the range of this ability, rather than increasing its overall power. Examples of its abilities include Gothir being able to knock out anyone with a power level below 400 within a 3-mile radius with his blackout technique, the ability to rewrite multiple memories at once with Rewrite Lights, the ability to lock onto opponents with Jido Suibi mode, or Tokusei Hanai Kakudai, which allows them to extend the length of their abilities even further than the base extension with Herit. We also haven't seen Gothir saying Sacred Treasure Release with any of their techniques, so they also might have some latent special abilities up their sleeve we just don't know about yet. Next up, we have Merlin's Sacred Treasure, Morningstar Alden. Appearance-wise, Alden is a relatively small sphere that floats around Merlin's hands while in use. Merlin can also summon Alden in a very similar way to how Gothir summons Herit. While the actual abilities of Alden are still unknown at this point, we do know that it greatly amplifies Merlin's potential with her magic power Infinity, and the many different spells that she's able to cast with it, as in she mainly uses Alden to help amplify or direct her various spells, such as Extermination Ray and Endless World to name just a few. Additionally, Merlin can also use Alden to display various locations when she wishes, and if, for some reason, Merlin's body were to be out of commission, such as turning to stone, she can transfer her soul into Alden and exist as her sacred treasure until her body heals. Similar to Diane and Gothir, Merlin has yet to say Sacred Treasure Release with any of her techniques, and given the nature of her already dangerous abilities, Alden might just have some deadly abilities we have yet to see. Next up, we have Escanor's Sacred Treasure, Divine Axe Rita. Appearance-wise, it appears like a very large axe, with spikes or spear-like blades on multiple parts of the weapon. The axe is also noted to be very off-balance, with the weight distributed poorly. But this is simply because the weapon is meant to be a one-handed axe, rather than a two-handed axe like its size would imply. Earlier we mentioned how Gideon weighed 2,200 pounds, and although we don't know the exact weight, Rita was said to be the heaviest out of the sacred treasures. Like all sacred treasures, Rita greatly amplifies Escanor's magical ability, or in this case, grace, Sunshine. But the axe itself also has a special ability called Charge and Fire, which is the ability to absorb and store the heat that radiates from Escanor. Escanor can then use a technique with the phrase Sacred Treasure Release, which releases all of the stored heat within the weapon, which will cause such a bright wave of heat that observers could easily mistake it for the actual sun itself. The heat released from the axe is also capable of burning everything within Escanor's surroundings. And if Escanor has enough stored power within Rita, he's also able to transform into his day form at night. Additionally, Escanor can also call upon Rita, and it will instantly travel through the air to his exact location, no matter where it currently resided within the world. If you want to learn more about Escanor's ability in general, feel free to click that card in the top right hand corner of the screen. Otherwise, a link will be in the description. Finally, we have Ban's sacred treasure, Holy Staff Courechouse. To be honest, I didn't think we were going to see this one revealed within the series, as it appeared the 7 Deadly Sins was about to end before we got completely bamboozled. But within some of the recent chapters, we finally got to see Courechouse in action, prompting the release of this video. Appearance-wise, it appears like a 4-sectioned staff, with spikes on each end. We've known about its appearance for some time now, but the information we were lacking was its abilities. Apparently, after Ban was thrown in jail, Courechouse was stolen, but at some point after that, Merlin acquired it, although we don't know how she got a hold of it, and has since given it back to Ban in the recent chapters. Like the other sacred treasures, it amplifies Ban's abilities to their full potential. However, similar to Lostvein, Courechouse is merely a staff weapon, until Ban says Sacred Treasure Release, which allows him to use an ability called Super Concentration, which pushes Ban's physical and mental abilities to their absolute maximum. In addition to seemingly limitless power, especially for current Arc Ban, this weapon in particular is able to attack in almost any direction, including any distance, any speed, or any angles. Combine all of this together, and Ban is able to use a technique called Assault Hunt, which allowed Ban to kill potentially hundreds to thousands of extremely powerful and small enemies in an instant, being able to target their exact locations all across Britannia, and hit them in the precise spot to kill them instantly, only failing to defeat a single one of these deadly enemies because he was apparently out of practice and let it get by. For context, these deadly enemies we're talking about are strong enough on their own to kill multiple holy knights without breaking a sweat. And with his sacred treasure, Ban was able to kill thousands of them in an instant. So although it took a while for this one to be revealed within the series, I'd say the payoff was definitely worth it, as that was badass. Before we go, I figured I should also mention that these sacred treasures are able to work together to create combination techniques with one another, and we have seen a few of these combination techniques as the series progressed. Most combination techniques have been made in pairs, such as combined technique Celestial Arrow between Gothir and King, but we've also seen triple combination attacks, such as Trinity Attack, High Tension Rush. Although these are only 2 examples, I just figured I'd bring it up. But with that, we've explained the 7 different sacred treasures and what they can do. Hopefully you guys enjoyed the video, and hopefully you learned something new or found a better understanding of how these weapons work. If you did, make sure to drop a like. While you're at it, be sure to subscribe for more 7 Deadly Sins content, and comment what you would like explained next. Follow me on Twitter at 2SpookyTube to keep up with the channel. Follow me on Twitch at 2Spookster for some streams. And with that, I thank you for checking out this video today. Once again, thank you to our sponsor Black Desert Online for making this video possible. Remember to follow that link in the description to get a 1-week free trial today.